Welcome to the Madison Miller podcast. Tonight's guest is the co-host of the Bastards of Boston Baseball podcast. It was formerly the Benny and the Bets podcast, but they changed names. And that is Terry Cushman. How are you doing on this fine Sunday evening?
I am so bored right now. There's really not much for sports for me other than maybe NASCAR, and that's boring until like the last 10 laps. So, yeah, pretty bored, but ready for some baseball.
Yes, I am ready for some baseball as well. The Boston Red Sox are the team you mainly cover. Very quiet offseason for the Red Sox. Did some small things to shore up their roster a little bit. Just give us a state of the team, and obviously Alex Cora back as well.
Well, I think if last season would have been 162 games, we probably would have won somewhere in the 68 win range. I'll give them 10 more wins with the moves they made this offseason. So I don't expect them to have a winning record. I see it more as a transition year. And I'm a little disappointed with that because I thought we had the resources to be better.
Yeah, I thought that you guys had a potential to make some moves. I heard rumblings about Trevor Bauer potentially. And then what you guys do is you guys bring in like smaller pieces and then trade away Andrew Benintendi. By the way, what do you make of Benintendi in that trade to Kansas City?
It had to happen. I know half of Red Sox Nation wanted to light Fenway Park on fire upon hearing that news, but his career has sharply trended downward, and the future was a mystery. So trade him now and you can get something, or you can let it ride. Maybe he figures it out and you get a couple more good years out of him, or maybe he flames out completely and you get nothing. I think Hein Bloom took the safe approach and got Frankie Cordero, who I'm not too familiar with. I don't think many Red Sox fans were. And some prospects back in that trade as well. So I didn't mind it.
Yeah, Frankie Cordero, that guy was from the Padres. I remember he had some pop to his bat. I won't be shocked if he pops out a couple over the monster at Fenway and gives you guys a little bit of a boost offensively. What do you make of Alex Cora coming back?
I wasn't a fan of it. I don't like cheaters, and he was a big part of the biggest scandal in MLB history, and possibly played a huge part in it. So to bring him back, I don't like the optics of it. Everything in the future is going to be heavily scrutinized. I'm not a fan of that. I would have just simply moved on. I don't think he's a make or break manager as far as winning a title. I mean, I think he is one of the better managers in the game, but I think we could have just as likely won a championship with someone else. So, and I tend to be anti-cheater all across the board. I don't think Bonds and Clemens should be in the Hall of Fame. I would have taken away the World Series win from the Astros. So that's kind of a theme for me to not back those guys, and I don't look at Alex Cora any differently.
Yeah, I was somewhat surprised that they brought him back. I remember listening to a podcast, a Boston sports gambling podcast. Have you ever heard of Joe Murray and Dan Lifshitz? And I forget what station in Boston that they were on. One of them, I believe it was Joe Murray, predicted that Cora would be back with the Red Sox, and I was like, what? No chance! And then he was right, and I was very surprised that he was right, and that the Red Sox brought back Alex Cora. Who is someone on the Red Sox that you think could have like a breakthrough season this year that nobody is really talking about?
I think if Tanner Houck can develop a third pitch, he could be a top of the rotation guy. Maybe not an ace, but a strong number 2 or 3. And he's going to start the year in Pawtucket I keep forgetting it's Worcester now. The Worcester Woo Sox is our AAA team. And They're going to try to work on that a little bit more. He's mostly a fastball slider guy, so if he can develop a changeup or something like that, I think he would be better suited to join the rotation. And if I'm wrong about the Red Sox and they win well over 78 games, it's going to be because Tanner Houck came up and was a beast and put that rotation on his back. So that's one guy I would look out for sure.
Yeah, Tanner Houck's very, very promising. And somebody who has not pitched in a long time is Chris Sale. What do you make of that whole situation when he can come back?
Well, it's looking like early summer for him, late June, early July at the earliest, and maybe it could be later in July. But his recovery seems to be on track. He hasn't had any setbacks. So I'm not so worried about the health aspect of it. But if you go back to that 2019 season, he was scuffling a little bit. And he's got 2 out pitches. One of them is a slider down and in, and he was getting outs with that pitch fairly regularly. But his fastball up and away typically is not a strike, and players stop swinging at that. And as a result, his walk rate went up, and he's got to find a way to get guys out other than a slider down and in. So, hopefully he figures that out, but I'm not one of those Red Sox fans who's taking anything for granted and assuming he's going to come back in Cy Young form. I am a little bit skeptical. But as far as health goes, no worries whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm skeptical about Chris Sale as well, so we're in agreement there. Let's talk baseball from the offseason. What do you think was the best trade or free agent signing that any team has done?
Oh, there's a few good ones. I gotta go with the Dodgers with the Trevor Bauer signing because they were probably a World Series team anyway. And then they just went over the top, signed him anyway. They got a nasty rotation. I mean, their number 5 is probably Dustin May or Julio Urias, whichever one you want to go with. And May would probably be a 3 on a lot of other rotations. The guy's just got some nasty stuff. And I really like what the Dodgers did. The Padres made huge splashes as well. I'm a little skeptical about Yu Darvish as far as a health and longevity standpoint, but if he proves me wrong in those 2 areas, then they've got an ace in him. Blake Snell also. I don't think he's going to be exiting any playoff games after the 5th inning. So good moves there. Atlanta made some kind of sneaky good moves, especially with Morton, and you factor that in with getting Soroka back at some point in the season. They did a good job. The Mets really did a good job shoring up their team. They didn't quite make the huge splashes that many thought they would make, but they got Lindor. They got, and they got Carrasco in that deal. They've got McCann catching now, so they made some other moves as well. Got Trevor May in the bullpen, so I think they should be competitive. That entire National League East division looks really good. Outside of maybe Miami, but I don't think they're too far away, and maybe they'll surprise people this year. So those are some of the teams that come to mind. Your Yankees, though, you made some moves, but you could go to the World Series because the American League is so bad, but when you look at the Dodgers, oh man, they're just head and shoulders above everybody.
I'm with you on the Dodgers, and I think that the American League's a little bit better than given credit for. I think that the best offseason move that you didn't talk about, and a move that I thought was tremendous, was the White Sox going out and acquiring Lance Lynn from the Rangers. I think the White Sox have a legit shot to represent the American League in the World Series. Imagine that rotation, him and you have Giolito in there. You got the kid coming off of Tommy John Kopech, and then Dylan Cease. That's a really good rotation in Chicago, and their offense is absolutely loaded. So I want to write off the White Sox in the American League. And then the Twins, that team's still pretty good in my mind. And then Oakland made some solid moves as well. So I think the Yanks have some competition in the American League. And don't forget about the Rays. They were just in the World Series, even though they just traded away Blake Snell. I like what Tampa Bay did. Don't count them out as well. Let's switch to the opposite end of the spectrum. The worst move of the offseason.
The Red Sox signing Garrett Richards, who's pitched 76 innings in 4 years. I hated that. Outside of that, I mean, I'm trying to think of a really bad signing. There was an overpay recently. I forget who it was and how it went down. But there wasn't anything where I was like, "Oh wow, that was a dumb move." As far as I can remember, the Phillies. I mean, Dombrowski goes and gets that Alvarado kid from Tampa who can't stay healthy. So that continues his trend of bad bullpens. But yeah, I don't know. What did you think was a bad move?
There's a couple that stood out to me for like not so great moves. You mentioned one of them with Alvarado. I didn't like the Indians trading away Lindor. I think they might have done it a little too soon. I think that they could have potentially gotten more for Francisco Lindor. And I still think the Indians have not a bad roster. So, like, what if the Indians are like 85 wins and they surprise some people in the AL Central and Lindor is out there, like, killing it for the Mets? Like, I think that, I know it's a great deal for the Mets. I think the Indians might have traded Lindor a little bit too soon. That's the one that sticks out for me in terms of a questionable move. And the Blue Jays, Tanner Roark, I didn't really like Tanner Roark. And I think the Blue Jays might regret some of those other pitchers that they added because, to me, they need the pitching to compete with the Yankees and the Rays in the American League East. They have the offense to do it, but they still, to me, have some pitching woes. What do you make of Toronto's offseason?
They're similar to the Red Sox where they kind of need some stars to align. Can Ryu stay healthy for a full season? He's going to be 34, 35 years old, something like that. So he's a bit of a wild card. That Peterson kid hasn't pitched for a full season, so I'm not quite sure what to expect there. If their pitching is average to above average, they could win the division. I mean, I don't think people were shocked that Tampa won it last year, but I don't think they were the front runner coming into the season. And Toronto won the division not too long ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago. When they traded for David Price, and I don't want to rule them out. They've got some energy. They just need the durability and the chemistry. And, the Springer signing, I think, will definitely put some energy into that team.
Yeah, for sure. Springer, I think, will be a big boost to that team's offense. To me, the Orioles are still the doormats of the American League East. I do think your team might be a little bit better than last year because I think that some guys can come back healthier and produce. So I still think the Orioles are last in the division. And a move that I didn't love was the Padres overpaying for Joe Musgrove. I was worried that my Yankees were going to go out and acquire him, but I think they arguably got the better Pittsburgh pitcher, even though has failed to stay healthy the last couple of years, in Jamison Tyon. I'm not a Joe Musgrove fan, and Joe Musgrove's going to be like the number 4 in their rotation. I just think the Padres overpaid for Joe Musgrove. I know we were talking about Darvish before and Blake Snell, but to me, Joe Musgrove, to me, the Padres paid a premium to get somebody that, to me, isn't even like the number 1 or number 2 guy in their own rotation. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it gives some depth to the back end of their rotation because you figure Snell is their number 1, Darvish number 2, Paddock probably slots in at 3, Lamet, if healthy, would be their number 4, and then Musgrove. I wasn't really a fan of either of Pittsburgh's, pitchers, Tyon or Musgrove, but he's going into a deep rotation, and if he's got a mid-3s ERA, by the end of the year, then, I guess you could say it was a successful trade. They have your old pitching coach, Larry Rothschild, so I don't know if that's a good thing.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing either. But all those Padres pitchers are very talented, and Lamet is better than a number 4 starter too. I was way wrong on Dinelson Lamet. I thought he was overrated going into last year because he had better Cy Young odds, or I'm sorry, lower numbered Cy Young odds. He was 20-1, and Paddock was 25-1, and that made me scratch my head. And then it turned out the Vegas was right about Lamet, and Paddock was worse than I expected. We saw a lot of big names traded this winter. We saw Francisco Lindor traded, Nolan Arenado traded. Who do you think's the next big name to get traded? Whether that's before the season or during the season.
Well, if you're talking a big name, I think that'll end up happening this summer. I think all the big trades have happened. That's a good question. If the Astros aren't in it, and I don't see why they wouldn't be, but if they kind of fall out of it, maybe they cash in and trade Correa a few months early, and they could still sign him next fall. You guys made a similar move with Chapman, so I would watch Houston to see where they're trending going into the summer, and maybe something like that could happen. If the Mets go into the toilet, like the Mets always do, you could see a guy like Stroman get traded, Syndergaard, who's an upcoming free agent. So that's another team to watch. Outside of them, nothing really comes to mind right now as far as big names.
I have one in mind. I'm surprised you didn't say the name Kris Bryant. To me, Kris Bryant has to be talked about in terms of big name potentially on the move. We've heard his name all winter long, and it looked like that he could have possibly been on the move, but no, he's still a member of the Chicago Cubs where things stand today. To me, the NL Central is the Cardinals' division to lose. I don't see anybody else winning that division. And
I agree.
I agree. You have the Cubs, the Brewers, and the Reds. To me, if any of those teams go in the tank, at least 2 of them I think will be in the tank, and the other could potentially be a surprise team for the season, considering how weak this division is, and considering that the worst team in baseball, the Pittsburgh Pirates, exist in that division. 2 of those 3 teams could potentially be in the 70s range, and maybe Kris Bryant or Josh Hader or Nicholas Castellanos or Luis Castillo could be on the move. And to me, Hader's somebody that I think the Brewers should absolutely cash in on, because the Brewers, to me, just don't have any pitching, really. And the Reds still have talent on their roster. The Cubs still have some talent on their roster, but those 3 teams, to me, are teams to look out for in terms of big-name trades.
You make an excellent point with Brian, because there's no point in keeping him. There's really no point. The Cubs aren't going anywhere. I think the fact that he did not get traded just speaks to how weak the trade market is as far as getting back a good return. I mean, you talk about Lindor getting traded. Don't forget, Carlos Carrasco was a throw into that trade, and the Indians still got nothing back. So maybe that's a reason why the Cubs hung on to Bryant. Maybe they'll test the waters this summer. The Reds are an interesting case, because you could make the case that if the Cardinals don't perform to expectations, they could have good seasons turned in by Castillo, Sonny Gray, and 1 or 2 other guys in their rotation, and maybe make a fight of that. I wouldn't completely rule out the Reds. I can't disagree that the Cardinals are the favorites, but every year there's a surprise, and I don't know why the Reds wouldn't be. And I'm a huge Brewers fan, but I got to agree with you that, they're probably going to have a losing record. And the thing about Josh Hader, his value, in my opinion, can only go down at this point. He's been around a while. He could flame out, because he's been used in long relief so many times. So, yeah, it's an interesting division, and it could be one that's targeted for trades, like you said.
Yeah, and there's another National League team that fits that same Brewers, Cubs, Reds bill of potentially their season could go either way. The Diamondbacks are a team with a ton of talent. They massively underachieved a year ago. If they underachieve again, could you see a world where they put some of their guys on the market, like potentially like a Zach Gallen or some of their like position players?
That's an interesting question. I know before the 2020 season, they had a bottom 5 farm system. So the players you mentioned are certainly names that they could look to trade to try to, build that farm system up a little bit. And it's hard to imagine that they're going to be too competitive with the Dodgers and the Padres smacking them around all year. So, yeah, I could see some trades from that team. Another team that could go either way is also the Giants.
Oh.
So, they could very well be a wild card contender, or maybe they're going to ship off some pieces as well.
Yeah, you can't rule out the San Francisco Giants. Last season, what I call the COVID season, because it was the expanded playoffs and you saw some weird teams in the mix, like the Giants. The Giants were in it on the last day of the season. If you don't remember that, they were literally in it on the last day of the season, and then I think they lost, and then somebody else won, and they didn't make it. So the Giants, to me, are an either-or team. And you mentioned the Marlins earlier. They made the postseason a year ago. They were in the NLDS. They upset the Cubs. That team wasn't bad last year. I think the National League East could very well be the best division. And I'm not big on the Phillies, but I don't know if the Marlins will finish ahead of the Phillies, but I would not sleep on the Miami Marlins being a possible surprise team. And then one more trade candidate in my mind. I think this team is a bad team, and that is the Rockies. And yes, I'm talking about Trevor Story, who I think is one of the best 5 shortstops in all of baseball.
Excellent point. Yeah, they could look to do it. That's such a weird organization. My only concern that they might not is maybe the owner at this point is afraid of the optics after trading Arenado, which seemed like a hostage situation. He wanted to leave so bad, but was trapped there. And the Rockies absolutely should be exploring a trade for Trevor Story. There's no reason for them to not try to build their farm system up either.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And the Arenado trade reminded me so much of when the Marlins traded Giancarlo Stanton to the Yankees because of that hefty contract. And it looked like a high-stage, although Stanton has failed to stay healthy in his Yankees tenure with the exception of the 2018 season. And Arenado, like I mentioned with Stanton, big contract, great player, but except he's always healthy and playing spectacular defense at third base. So I agree with you that the Cardinals absolutely stole Arenado from the Rockies. Off the trade subject into pressure subject, what team do you think is under the most pressure to win in 2021? I think I know where you're going with this.
Honestly, I think it's the Yankees.
I agree.
You're starting to hear some chirps from the fan base that maybe Cushman should be fired. I don't think that will happen, but I think the heat can get turned up a little bit. So that's certainly a team that's under some pressure. The Twins have been competitive the last few years, but let's face it, that window will close at some point. So I think there's some pressure there. I think the Phillies, their fan base is sick of underachieving because on paper, they've had some good teams coming into the season, but I put it mostly on the Yankees at this point.
I 100% agree with you. The answer would have been the Los Angeles Dodgers had maybe Kevin Cash kept Blake Snell in the game. You never know.
There was a good chance Charlie Morton was going to be pitching Game 7 if Snell was allowed to stay in. He probably would have pitched into the 7th or 8th, and that's too bad. And Randy Arozarena had a hell of a postseason, and I really wanted to see that continue a little longer. And Manny Margot also kind of had a breakout year. And you said, several minutes ago, don't sleep on the Rays, but they've got Archer back, so maybe their pitching program can turn him around. Michael Wacha, Tampa seems like a perfect organization to get his career turned around. And they just seem to pull pitchers out of thin air anyway. So I don't know that they're going to miss a beat, really.
I agree with you about the Rays. I don't even know if they're going to miss a beat. I think that at least one of Archer Waka will pan out. And don't forget, they also signed Rich Hill. I think he can potentially help them as well in that like Charlie Morton type of role. But yeah, to my question about who's under the most pressure, to me it is the New York Yankees, my beloved New York Yankees. Yes, we talked about Brian Cashman. I'm a Brian Cashman supporter. I think that he should have a job in New York forever because he helped orchestrate a dynasty, and then 2009 really helped him as well. But I think he's done a great job building this team. But I think the Yankees have been unlucky with some injuries the past couple years. I think that they've run into tough pitching in the postseason with the Rays, and then before that with the Astros, despite the cheating scandal. And then the only time to me that I hate to say this to you, the Red Sox fan, but although your pitching deserves credit, but your pitching staff is not as good as the Rays was and was the Astros from a couple years ago. And so yeah, to me that Red Sox series over the last couple years was the series that really frustrated me perhaps the most, although they all frustrated me in ways. And so Aaron Judge, I'm obviously a huge fan, as you know. He has to stay healthy. Gleyber Torres has to have a better season, I think. Re-signing DJ LeMahieu to me was important for the Yanks. So yeah, to me the New York Yankees are under the most pressure, and quite frankly, I don't think it's close. If there's a distant second, it might be the White Sox because of what they did in the offseason, and that's a big market team, and then the Phillies, obviously, and then the other team in New York, the New York Mets, to me, are a team under a ton of pressure to win this year as well. And then if you ask me a fifth, to me, it's Atlanta, who has had a window that's been open for a couple years now with a couple stars in Fernandez, or I almost said Tatis, Ronald Acuna, and Freddie Freeman. And then the Padres also, to me, are under some pressure as well with some of the big moves they've made. Before you go, promote your podcast.
Well, we host the Bastards of Boston Baseball. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, basically all of the prominent apps we are available. We're kind of a rowdy crowd. If you're a Yankees fan and you're looking for a podcast that isn't like a major homer podcast, we're not that crew. We're tough on the team when we have to be, which is mostly the last couple of years, quite frankly, and probably this year. But yeah, it's an entertaining crowd, and I don't think anybody tells the story of the Boston Red Sox like we do.
Yeah, you guys are very good with your show. I've listened to it several times, and you pretty much owned up to your point of not being homers, and that's what I appreciate about your show. And I try not to be a homer on my show. Sometimes my guests can be homers, but you're certainly not a homer. And so yeah, I try to be very honest on my show as well. So it was a pleasure to have you on today, and hopefully you can come on during the baseball season, and we can talk some more baseball.
Grab me whenever you want. I love talking baseball.
I know you love talking baseball. Hope you have a wonderful night.
You as well.